Hello and welcome to the Deadly Dialogues Part 2. I'm Deadly Jedley and I thought I would do this again today because while I was at work today I thought of a few things I wanted to talk about. So what I thought about at work today on my break, or maybe when I was working, although I do try and focus on work when I'm at work, is the Apple computer advertising campaign of 1997. Which was called Think Different. And what it was, I think maybe a song came on the radio that reminded me of John Lennon, the late Beatle, because Apple had an advertising campaign called Think Different, and they had a whole lot of black and white posters put up all over the world, I think, but mainly in America, and posters and advertisements in magazines and things of people who thought different, like Mahatma Gandhi, John Lennon, Albert Einstein, the different thinkers, so to speak. And the idea was that if you're an Apple user and you used Apple computers, you thought different to most other people who use Windows PCs. So that was the idea behind that campaign. Now, I used to read a magazine called Mac Addict, which used to come out every month, which we used to go down to the local news agency and buy, and it was about $20 because it came from America. And, the magazine came with a CD on the cover. That magazines don't come with discs anymore because everything's downloadable. But this is in the days when CD was the format of choice for software, right? And on the discs were these advertisements as well to do with Think Different for the Apple iMac G3 Bondi Blue, which is the original Apple iMac computer that Apple released in 1998. And it sold 800,000 units in 6 months or something, I remember reading. And it was literally advertised all over the place in ads of the Apple iMac up against the Pentium 2, which was the chip in PCs at the time. Most Windows PCs had the Pentium 2 chip. So Steve Jobs at Apple was the one who wanted to really push the iMac to say, well, this is the computer people should be buying because it did everything. It did the internet, it did games, it did a bit of work, it did word processing, it did photos, music. It didn't do movies at that time because the movie version came later to edit home movies on your iMac computer. That was a later model. I'm talking about the original model. So, and the Think Different campaign extended to that because the iMac G3 was a totally different computer to anything that had been seen before. It really was such a radically different home computer, and it sold, like I said, it sold nearly a million units in 6 months, which saved Apple itself from bankruptcy. So I thought about that at work today, and I think the song that came on the radio was Imagine by John Lennon, because I remember he featured in the advertisement, or photographs of him and his wife Yoko Ono, his wife, John Lennon's widow, his wife at the time when the photos were taken of John Lennon, the ex-Beatle, because that's what now I'm on to the next topic, the Beatles. I love the Beatles, right? Because I started listening to the Beatles when I was maybe 14 years old. I went to school one year with my hair in a Beatles mop top, and the other boys in the year said, Jed, what are you doing? Why aren't you gelling your hair or spiking your hair? Why do you have a mop top? Like you're out of the 1960s or something, right? I didn't care, because I love the Beatles. And I saw Paul McCartney 18 months ago in Sydney. The concert was amazing, by the way. And so back to the Beatles. So they call them former Beatles, ex-Beatles, the Beatles. Like Paul McCartney might say he's an ex-Beatle because he's not a Beatle. Well, he's still a Beatle, but the band doesn't exist anymore. The band broke up in 1970. So the ex-members of the Beatles, I think, is the best way to put it. So what else is on my mind? So I spoke a bit about cricket yesterday, and I might talk a bit about cricket again because I had a third cricket video. So I'm going to have another coffee. I had a third cricket video of the 1997 Ashes series in England, which was a really amazing series because England won the first test, then we won 3 out of the next 4, and it ended up being 3-2 because England won another one. So we won the Ashes series in 1997, 3 matches to 2, with I think 1 draw in it. It was a 6-test series. Because that's funny, because the Ashes has been 5 tests, and I'll talk about the Ashes, right, because I love cricket. The Ashes has been 5 tests for many years now, but I think whenever it was played in England, there was sometimes a sixth test played at the Oval, which is another cricket ground in England. So an Ashes series in England could have been drawn 3 games all, or 4-2, or 5-1, or 6-0, depending on the results. So all I know is the Ashes in Australia are a best of 5 test series, and it'll be like Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, I think. I don't know the order of the tests, except the Boxing Day test is always in Melbourne and the New Year's test is always in Sydney. And we actually went to a few New Year's Day tests years ago. Dad used to take us up to the SCG, and he always got a parking spot in the members area because he knew, members of the SCG. And we were members of the SCG as well, which got us into the inner sanctum, so to speak, right near the players' dressing room. And I remember we went up to the Steve Waugh test where he hit the 4 off the last ball of the day. That was the Ashes 2003, January 2003. And a year later we went up to the same test but different opponents. It was India in January 2004 when Steve Waugh finally retired. We were at his final test match. 168 tests. Then Ricky Ponting, who I mentioned yesterday, also played 168 tests. And when I mentioned Ricky Ponting yesterday and said he was like the prototypical batsman of his generation, what I mean is his technique and his style were like ahead of their time, but it didn't mean he didn't fail. He may have taken a while to start scoring centuries, which took him 18 months or so to get his first test match century, 100 runs in an innings. But after that, he was off and no one could stop him for the next 15 years. So Ricky Ponting really blazed the way for that generation of batsmen. Like then other guys came after him, like your Michael Clarks and your Simon Katichs, who was in the Test side for a while. I remember Dad saying Simon Katich would be Test captain one day, but he never was because he didn't really succeed at Test level. I think because the reason was Simon Katich found it hard to hold down a place in the side because of guys like Damien Martin, who are already more established, who I mentioned yesterday, and other players in and around the side who was very competitive in those years. And the opening combination proved tough because Matthew Hayden and Justin Langer locked in the opening spots, which kind of locked out any other possible openers during those years, like Matthew Elliott, who did play a few tests before Justin Langer came back into the side. Matthew Elliott played a handful of tests, including on that 1997 Ashes series I mentioned. He's on my video. He scores 199 in one of the tests, and that was a great innings, if you ask me, by Matthew Elliott, the Victorian left-handed opening batsman. So what else was there? Tennis. I'll talk a bit about tennis now because it's all happening in tennis. The French Open's coming up in about a month, and I saw on X that Rafael Nadal is going to be honoured at the opening ceremony or on the opening day's play or something. They're going to name a court after him or something, or have a big special ceremony for Rafael Nadal, who is known as the King of Clay, and he was unbeatable on clay back in the day. Now here's what I thought the other day. Right, when Roger Federer was invincible on grass courts like Wimbledon and Halle, and Rafael Nadal was unbeatable on clay courts like the French Open and Madrid, what would happen when they met each other on those courts? Who would win the match? Now, I used to have a black Apple MacBook, an older model. I've got a newer black Apple MacBook, but I had an old model years ago, back in like 2006, 2007, 2008. And I would stay up and watch the French Open finals on streaming websites. This is long before streaming as we know it today. And I would watch the French Open final, the Wimbledon final on my laptop on these websites that streamed. Like, it wasn't legal, it was illegal streaming services of pay TV sports television channels like Sky Sports and ESPN. And if you knew where to look on the internet, you could watch these sporting matches. And it was always Federer would get to the final, but Rafael Nadal would beat him. So, or maybe Federer won a few of the finals, but most of the time, people would bet their houses on Federer, literally. And I think there was one guy in England who had a cumulative jackpot bet going on with Roger Federer, saying it was something like this. People who know what I'm talking about will know what I'm talking about. This guy bet money that Roger Federer would win Wimbledon every year in a row for like a certain amount of years. And then what happened was Federer got to 5 Wimbledons in a row, 5 years in a row he won it, the tournament, the slam. Then the cumulative jackpot bet was like $1 million for the first year, 2 million for the second, 3 for the third, 4 for the fourth, 5 for the fifth. So 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 is something like 9, 12, like £15 million this guy had in his jackpot bet, which he cashed out, luckily in time after Federer won Wimbledon for the 5th time in a row. So this guy made £15 million or something, and he would have lost it if he kept going the next year, because Federer lost Wimbledon the following year. He didn't win 6 in a row. That was the big thing at the time. Would Federer win 6 Wimbledon straight? And he couldn't do it. So someone in England, but I think the guy died or something, and it was his son or a family member who collected the £15 million that this guy had. He must have had a bit of money to start with to make the bet. Anyway, I think that's something that happened. Like I said, that might not be exactly how it went, but that's how I remember reading about it. Maybe I read about it on the internet or heard about it through word of mouth or something. Anyway, so the French Open's come out, then it'll be Wimbledon. And actually, the other day at work, I saw a customer had a Wimbledon hat on. I recognised the purple and green logo, colours, right? And we got talking a bit about tennis, and he said, who's your tip for Wimbledon this year? I think Carlos Alcaraz, the Spaniard's going to win it 3rd time in a row because he's really good on grass. Anyway, that's just my prediction. I have to admit I'm not hugely up to speed with the tennis world at the moment, because all I know is Madison Keys won the Australian Open and Yannick Sinner won the Australian Open. That was the first slam back in January. And so, yeah, tennis. I do like a bit of tennis. I don't play it, but I like watching it. So what else was there? I've spoken about a few things. Why don't I speak a bit about, have another sip of coffee. Okay, back to my favourite topic, and I'll keep it short because I know it can get boring sometimes. But Apple, right? So I started using Apple maybe in the old days, like in 1993, 1994, when my dad's colleague's son and I became friends. His name was Rhys Jones. And I used to go over to Rhys's house nearby in the same area, because they were locals as well, the Southern Highlands. And his dad had an Apple Mac Quadra, which, to put it lightly, was a very expensive and powerful Apple Mac computer at the time. This is going back like 30 years ago now. And we'd play games on it like Prince of Persia and use the voice recorder to record voices and have fun with it. So then I said to Dad, we should get an Apple Mac computer as well. So we eventually got an Apple Mac. How many times am I going to say those words? Apple Mac, Apple Mac, Apple Mac. Like maybe 5 years after that, we got one ourselves at home, and Dad used it for work. And then I got my own Apple iBook G3 when I was about 15, a laptop. And you know what? I really liked that laptop. I saved up for it. It took me like 2 years to save up the money because I worked for Dad. Actually, I'll change topics. I'll tell you what I did for work when I was a kid. I used to colour in Ginger Meg's, my dad's comic strip, for him on the computer. And I get $5 per strip. A comic strip. When I say a strip, I mean like a single one. I get $5 for a comic strip, single decker, like single panels, layer panels, and then I would get $15 for a triple decker, Sunday strip. So that used to take me longer to colour, and I saved up enough money, and then I bought my laptop, and then I was really happy. And I used to go on the internet and watch DVDs. I watched Star Wars DVDs. I watched Concert for George DVDs, the Beatles again. So that was on my old laptop. And I highly recommend Apple laptops. I don't have a new one, but I've got an old one. But anyway, is there anything else I had to talk about? What else was I thinking today at work? No, I think that's about it. How about I talk a bit about, before I go, I've been talking about 14 minutes. So I'll go to 15 minutes. I'll mention something about football, right? So the way I see it is, social media can be really poisonous sometimes, because I think all over X and maybe on Facebook as well, there's been posts and articles and comments about players, mental health issues and quitting clubs and changing clubs, and people really get stuck into these guys, right? And I just think it's just not on. Just leave the players alone. They're doing their job. If a player wants to leave, like the Eels, and go to the Bulldogs, or the Panthers and go to the Roosters, it's their decision, and so just leave it like that. And I think Peter Sterling would say the same thing. Yeah, still. This is Deadly Deadly. Goodbye. I'll do the next one later on. Bye.